Hi, everyone, and welcome to our ProcureCon webinar with GEP Worldwide, Combating Inflation, the top 3 tools you need right now. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll dive into how to gear up for the uncertainties that lie ahead, as well as discuss how technology can act as a facilitator in helping procurement teams harness value from data. If you have any questions for our speaker today, feel free to submit them at any time during this presentation using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them soon. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mukund from GEP Worldwide.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, everyone else. This is a real pleasure to be here. My name is Mukund Acharya. I'm a vice president at GEP. I co-lead our retail and CPG practice. And I've spent a lot of time with some of my clients in the last 2 years, especially, talking about inflation. There's no quick fix for it. I think what we've seen is that inflation initially had been dormant for almost 2 decades, and then it came back. It came back in 2021, and we saw a huge spike in 2022. So one of the questions that keep coming up is, how can we fight this, and how can we fight inflation? What are the different things we can do? And there's no magic bullet. There's no simple solution that addresses it. So in today's webinar, we really want to talk about 3 different things we could implement. A lot of our customers look at this. They look at ways to combat inflation, reduce the effect of inflation, but more importantly, they're doing it in a very strategic way. There's no point solution. What they're trying to do is understand some of the key drivers, work within the limitations of their business, and build the right tools, technologies, and processes that helps them support the overall cost structure, but also helps them figure out ways they can minimize the impact of inflation. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk briefly about some of this. So, we've seen inflation kick in. We know that initially it was due to the global the war in Europe. We knew there were post-COVID implications, but inflation's still here. It hasn't gone away. It can be seen across multiple categories. The housing market continues to expand. At the same time, we're facing the threat of recession. So these signals are confusing. Companies are hesitant to work hard on inflation, worried that the landscape might change. So for example, we've seen a huge, rapid cost on ocean freight. But at the same time, we've seen a rapid decrease in the last few weeks. And so this idea that we'll have a tool that'll help us completely mitigate the effects of inflation just doesn't exist. So what a lot of CPOs are doing, they're trying to mitigate costs. They're trying to build the right pieces of the puzzle so they can address the challenges of inflation, they can address the variability, the uncertainty, and the only way really to do that is through technology. We've seen a lot of companies invest in technology. So the effects, the positive impact of technology is known, but the problem often arises: how much do we invest? Where do we invest? How do we invest? We know that there's value. We know that capturing the data, capturing all these input signals, we can respond faster, we can plan better, we can make better and more accurate decisions. And so this is really what we want to discuss today. And with that, really, I would say there's sort of 3 steps we should think of taking when we look at inflation. I'll list them here, but I'll get into a little more detail on subsequent slides. The first one is to move from our favorite, Microsoft Excel, over to data and analytics. We've spent 2-3 decades working in Excel. A lot of companies have moved in bits and pieces beyond that, but I'm sure most of you have seen either your competitors or painfully yourself having to do a lot of work in Excel. The second piece is for category intelligence. Again, a lot of you have built category strategies, but category intelligence is a little different. While it collects backward-looking data, it also looks forward. It looks for the ways to understand trends, looks for advanced information, and really looks for ways that knowledge of the category, changes in the category can be captured and acted on. And the last piece is on inventory visibility. Knowing where your product is, knowing the cost of the product, knowing where you have the ability to move product from one point to the other is key. Again, a lot of companies have worked on inventory. By itself, this is not a solution for inflation, obviously, but all these three taken in concert can actually help. They can drive a far more visible understanding of inventory, of inflation, look for ways to mitigate the impact of inflation. But there are steps that all companies should look to take. Perhaps we can go to the next slide. So the move from Excel to data analytics. It's not just about analysis. We've captured gigabytes of data. Data exists. Unfortunately, a lot of the data is not clean. It hasn't been normalized. It's the classic example of information versus insight, or data versus insight. So one of the big foundational pieces of what we should, foundational activities, is to look at data as an entity, not just spend data, but every input of data we can capture. Having a unified database, we call it a data lake, is critical for this. It's not a simple task. It takes a lot of data cleansing. Obviously, all of us know, garbage in, garbage out. But the whole point here is to collect all the data we can, clean it, categorize it, and store it in a database. This can be accessed by anyone. This can be accessed by all the key constituents, all the parties required who need that access. But more importantly, this is accurate, real-time information. So this uniformity of data is critical. Once we have this data, again, looking at it, whether it's spend data, supplier data, we can also look to collect data from other sources. We can look at news feeds. We can look at price indices. We can look at any other factors that drive costs in our business. Building things like should cost models requires accurate data. It requires access to pricing indices. It looks at the ability to conduct a lot of analytics. All this is critical. Having that foundation really enables us to move away from this Excel transactional mindset to a more analytical data mindset. Randy, can you move to the next slide? The second piece we talk about is category intelligence. I know most of you have probably created category strategies. Quite often those category strategies are backward looking. We collect historical spend data, we build PowerPoint decks, and then those strategies are looked at twice a year. A number of our customers are now thinking of it more strategically. It's not about how many slides in your category strategy deck, it's how often do you use it and how valid that information is. So instead of a 50 or 100-page category strategy, there's a lot of benefit of having maybe a 10-page or 15-page, something you can revisit and update frequently. So how do we do this? A lot of the information we pull in historically in category strategies has been a combination of spend data, some level of market analysis. Their market analysis, for the most part, has been Google or web searches. Has been discussions with the business, and there's been a certain amount of guesswork. It's looking at various data points and sort of trying to guess what might and might not happen. What's missing here is real-time information, mainly because that the platform to do that doesn't exist or didn't exist. And so when we think of category intelligence, we think of almost like a category workbench. It's something where, as a category manager, you could look at every aspect of your category. You could look at historical spend. You could look at top suppliers. You could look at key contracts. You could look at all the key drivers of the business strategy. And the new piece around this is to look at real-time data feeds, whether it is keywords that drive from search engines that tell you what select suppliers are doing. You may hear of strikes in the region where you may have your manufacturing. You may hear of acquisitions, either suppliers being acquired or are acquiring, other geopolitical risks, natural disasters. All this information can come in one source. So this type of category information or category intelligence is key. It really helps the broader understanding. The challenge here, of course, is not to get overwhelmed by data. We can always pull in data point after data point, and then get into analysis paralysis, not being able to act on it, not being able to make informed decisions, and always searching for every piece of data we can. But this is key as we think of moving category intelligence, understanding trends, understanding pricing drivers, cost drivers, getting further insights beyond just static spend data is critical. And that's really the role of technology. It can collect all this data, unify it, drive it, and enable procurement supply chain to really closely track cost drivers. And of course, the key goal is always to de-risk your operations, de-risk your supply chain, de-risk issues or challenges to the business. So category intelligence is key. And with that, we'll move on to the third point I wanted to make. Inventory visibility. Now, over the years, we've done and seen a lot of our clients and customers build complex inventory tracking solutions, but not everywhere. So we've had cases where inventory is either not tracked or poorly tracked, or it's tracked in silos, multiple warehouse management systems, multiple ways of tracking inventory, no clear understanding of the cost of that carried inventory, and sometimes it's done in Excel. So looking at inventory visibility is really one other driver we can use. Again, with the mindset that if inflation's here, we have to work around it. Obviously, no company can handle inflation or change the inflationary path. Those are macroeconomic factors or monetary factors, but they can do more with less. They could look at having a cloud-based inventory system or software that is easily accessible, that gives you real-time information on product availability. We can use that to track not just where product is, but how do we flow it to other nodes in our supply chain? We can look at where excess inventory sits, the cost to hold that inventory. All this really enables us to be more agile. It helps us address some of these inflationary pressures, but not all the time, but it does help us. And so we look at ways to carry the right levels of inventory, carry the right levels of inventory in the right place, and more importantly, at the right cost. So to quickly recap, we've talked about three of these drivers. We've talked about data analytics, we've talked about inventory visibility, and we've talked about category intelligence. We feel that these are three ways most of our customers can quickly address some of the challenges caused by inflation. And this is not done in a haphazard way. So if you move to the next slide, Randy, you want to talk about how we look at this in a more holistic way. So when we think of these types of solutions, they need to be looked at in a very strategic manner. They have to be looked at not as quick fixes, but they have to be looked at something that can lay the foundation, that is scalable, that it's flexible, and that it helps drive adoption of the business. It becomes sort of the new way of working. We want to make sure that all this is accurately captured, the technology that can be used to drive this type of change, help mitigate some of these costs. And in our experience, this is where everything is moving. If any organization that hesitates to adopt this will be challenged. They will find that ability to move and adjust to any of these supply shocks will get progressively more and more difficult. So with that, I do want to share that these are areas that we think can add a lot of value to our customers. And with that, I'd like to open the door for some questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mukund, for bringing us all this insightful information. And now, yeah, let's get some questions. So the first one I see on here is, what are some of the challenges in choosing the right tools to combat inflation as procurement and supply chain teams move beyond Excel?
I think one of the big challenges is not having a strategic goal, not having an end result in mind. So sometimes it gets to be reactive, and the reactive could be lack of budget, lack of leadership buy-in, lack of a cohesive story. It could be lack of time. People tend to react almost, or tend to be very reactive. And so these things slow down, and even if the adoption happens, it tends not to be as successful. So generally what we tell our clients is, look at your overall structure. What problem are you trying to solve? All you're trying to do at this point is mitigate the impact of inflation. This isn't about a supplier not being productive. This isn't about a challenge in your supply chain. These are macroeconomic factors that you cannot control. And so when you think of how you'd address this, how do you manage your cost base? You have to think both from a technology standpoint, but also look at a process standpoint. Do you have the right structure in place? Do you have the right supply chain? Are you flexible enough to make these changes? All these will drive adoption, successful adoption of your technology platform.
Great, awesome. And then the next one here is, how can technology help avoid unnecessary shocks and complexity in the supply chain?
That's a great question. So that's one of the things that we often talk about supply chains. They're never called boring supply chains. We always talk about agile supply chains. We talk about supply chain disruption. When supply chains work, no one talks about them. So when you think of the role of technology, it's really about visibility. There are two components to it. One is, do I know what's happening? Can I see the impact? Can I measure the impact to my supply chain? And the second piece is, when do I expect this to happen? If I had upfront notice that, let's say, the potential for a strike in one of the regions where manufacturing is being conducted, it may give me time to react. It may give me time to store excess inventory. It may give me time to look for alternative sources. And that's really where we see some of this. There's no magic solution. There's no single button you can press, but it does force a certain amount of thinking. It forces the ability to look beyond your standard spend and look at other factors that drive your supply. And the best way to do it through technology. We have all these inputs. We have news sources. We have social media. We have Twitter. We have the ability to start getting more real-time data, and from that we drive real-time insights. A lot of the data could be noise, but that's where the skill comes in. The ability to look at this noise and make some thoughtful and hopefully accurate decisions.
And with that in mind, so what are some tips for getting executive buy-in for investing in tools to combat inflation?
Yeah, so I think that is the crux of this. End of the day, how do you get this buy-in? So I would go back to some of the standard, and there's nothing new here, but it's sometimes we lose track of this. It is to have a clear picture. What are you trying to do? So when we work with some of our clients in procurement, sometimes the request is, we just need to drive savings. Sometimes it is, we need to have these savings to be sustainable because we don't have the processes or policies to enable this. So then it becomes more transformative. But the benefit of that transformative work is that it builds the foundation and it builds in the sustainability you need. So same way when we look at these types of tools, it is building the foundation. Is it a point solution? If so, what is the long-term goal? The last thing you want to do is invest in a point solution and have to throw it away 3 years later. So it is looking at overall, what is the goal? Is it visibility? Is it supply surety? Is it higher knowledge of what's happening through the entire supply chain, not just in manufacturing? So that's what drives it. So I think a clear strategic vision is key. The second piece is understanding the rollout and having a partner who's seen this. So we've worked with clients across multiple industries. What we want to do is make sure that the picture is very clear. There's a clear clear ROI. There's a clear understanding of scope and timing. Remember, you're not building something to implement 24, 36 months from now. You're building something you can implement quickly with the ability, if necessary, to expand and scale. So having that flexibility, having a clear story, a very cohesive understanding of the problem goes a long way. And that's where we find, especially in procurement, having that level of discussion with the CEO, the CFO on a frequent basis, not just when it happens, but hopefully 6 months, a year from now. What you're trying to do is build a foundation today. So when this actually happens, you have the ability to react to it. That's really, I would say, the big takeaway. That's what drives adoption and success.
Thank you. Okay, and I think, okay, we have one final question here, and that is, how do you ensure that your technology is future-proof and can handle swings in the economy?
That's a great one. I think when you talk about future-proofing, what we're saying is, do you have a technology solution or a technology partner who is always investing, who is looking to grow the capability, grow their ability to deliver, their footprint? And so for a customer, that's what they should be looking for. Does this partner have the depth and breadth of skill to address changes, address complexity, keep growing with you? As we think of supply, again, it goes back to the problem you're trying to solve. And what do I need? Do I need the full suite of tools in the next 6 months, or can I do it over 18 or 24 months? And that's where having that flexibility and planning well in advance with the right partner, it gives you that ability to address changes. It gives you the ability to handle swings in supply. But it also drives other decisions. When you think of the ability, if you know something's going to change in a supply base, do you have the process and the policy and the ability beyond technology to adjust your supply chain? Do you have additional sources of supply? Do you have the ability to switch your supply chain or your shipping modes to a different format? Do you have the ability to hold excess inventory as needed at a reasonable cost? Do you hold excess inventory? Is your inventory easy to get to? So all those are key drivers. But I would say, in general, when you think of the adoption, you think of this variability in supply, having that initial strategy and that point of view, and then building your tools with a partner who can scale is critical.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much for answering those questions. And if we didn't get to anyone's questions, we'll receive a follow-up via email. So with that, I think we can bring this to a conclusion. So thank you very much to our audience for joining us today, and a huge thank you and a round of applause to Mukund for an amazing session. And you can look forward to receiving an on-demand link to this presentation directly to your email inbox as well after this webinar. So keep a lookout for that. So with that, I'll bring this program to an end. So on behalf of GEP, ProcureCon, and the WB, our Insights team, we thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.